I wanted to start here talking a little bit about the ICJ, and maybe just to give some context here. I think people have probably seen maybe some headlines that Germany has intervened, the government of Germany has intervened on Israel's behalf as it concerns the charge of genocide. And I guess that's kind of my first question: is why would Germany take this step to step into this case and defend Israel against the charge of genocide brought by South Africa and now many other nations?
Well, Eugene, the German government's intervention on Israel's side before the ICJ in South Africa's genocide case is part of its unconditional support for Israel's war in Gaza. Germany and other leading NATO states support Israel because of their geopolitical interest in not losing Israel as an ally in the region, especially with regard to the conflict against Iran. And in Germany, there is also the fact that the German government places its claimed raison d'etat, Staatsräson, what they say, of unconditionally defending Israel's right to exist above international law. And regardless of all violations of international humanitarian law by the Israeli government, the German government therefore continues to support Israel politically, financially, and militarily. And by intervening before the ICJ, it is clearly seeking to prevent Israel's war crimes and human rights violations from being prosecuted under international law. And after all, by supporting Israel, the German government shares responsibility for these crimes. This is also the reason why Germany itself has been now charged by Nicaragua before the ICJ, and the German government is accused of abetting genocide and violations of international humanitarian law with its massive arms deliveries to Israel and its ceasing to the fund to the United Nations Palestinian Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the Nicaragua intervention against Germany, because I believe you were there as a parliamentary observer as some of that played out. And I'm curious some of your reflections on that. I mean, how Germany was responding to Nicaragua's charge that they are indeed aiding and abetting genocide in Gaza, and just anything else you think was relevant from being there in that hearing.
Well, the German defense essentially put forward two arguments, which, however, were not very convincing to me, at least. So firstly, it tried to play down the importance of German arms aid to Israel. However, Germany is Israel's second largest arms supplier after the United States. According to the data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, German weapons have accounted for 30% of Israel's arms imports over the last 5 years. Last year, 2023, Germany's share was as high as 47%, closely behind the US with 53%. So licenses for new arms exports in 2023, most of them after 7th October, have also increased 10 times compared to the previous year. And these included, according to questionnaires to the government by me and my group, Alliance Sarah Wagenknecht in the German Bundestag, and this was the basis actually of the indictment of Nicaragua, all the informations they got from my parliamentary work in the German Bundestag. These included 3,000 anti-tank weapons that or munition can be used directly in the war against the Palestinian civilian population. So this was the first argument. The second argument, was the German government has put forward very absurd, formalistic argument that the ICJ has not yet classified the Israeli military operation as a genocide, and that Germany cannot therefore be found guilty of aiding and abetting a genocide. In doing so, however, the German government is ignoring the central obligation under international law that arises from the Genocide Convention, namely to prevent a genocide. Yeah, and this is all the more important as the ICJ, in the case of South Africa versus Israel, considered on the 26th of January that there is a plausible risk of genocide and issued provisional measures to protect the civilian population in Gaza. So regardless of how the ICJ decides, at the end of the day, the German government and the US government must urgently stop supplying arms to Israel, as the UN Human Rights Council has called for, and as a NATO partner, Canada already did. They stopped the arms to Israel. And this is all the more important as Israel is ignoring the UN Security Council's call for ceasefire. And that's why we urgently need to prevent a further bloodshed through an invasion in Rafah and an escalation in the conflict with Iran. Germany and the United States of America must finally impose an arms embargo on Israel and thus exert pressure for an immediate ceasefire and an end to Israeli war crimes.
I mean, it's maybe I shouldn't be surprised at this, but it really does seem, and I'm hoping you can comment on this, like there's something of a double standard at play here as way Germany, the United States, the way they're approaching this. I mean, you know, Russia, it was like 3 weeks into the invasion of Ukraine, and they said that's a genocide. When we talk about other countries around the world, you know, Myanmar, Sudan, there's never any sort of like reticence, even though we're not seeing, and this is not to downplay anything happening in any of these places, but there's not the same level of just everyday documentation. But in this case, you know, it's like everyone's at great pains to say that there is no genocide. So I was wondering if you could just speak to that aspect and what you think is behind that.
Well, unfortunately, that's true. In my view, the West's handling of the war in Gaza is a new peak of Western double standards. There is no doubt that Israel is waging a brutal war, committing numerous war crimes that have killed more than 33,000 people, including more than 13,000 children. And the fact that the West continues to support Israel despite the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and the violations of international humanitarian law by this right-wing government in Israel shows its complete hypocrisy and double standards when it comes to the protection of human rights and respect for international law claimed by the West itself. And I think this is really an impressive illustration of its instrumental approach to international law, which is apparently only supposed to apply when it suits the West's own geopolitical interests. These double standards and the conditional support of Israel have created the framework for the partly far-right Israeli government not to hesitate to set off a dangerous spiral of escalation with the attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus, in Syria. So the US, the United Kingdom, and France have blocked the condemnation of the Israeli attack on the Iranian embassy by the UN Security Council, and the German government has also not condemned Israel's attack, in contrast to the Iranian counterattack.